Folks, so much attention has been paid to what's happening in Ukraine as a result of Russia invading that nation. We've heard all kinds of stories about atrocities taking place, families finding loved ones murdered, all kinds of shocking and devastating things. But the same thing is happening. South Sudan, Cameroon, Ethiopia. Yet unfortunately, mainstream media in America doesn't care. Folks in other European nations don't care. That is often the case of what happens in African nations. Folks, what is happening there is disturbing. It is shocking. And my next two guests, they have had to witness these atrocities. They've shared with us extremely graphic images, and they're also graphic details. Now, some of y'all yesterday have hit me, said that a warning was placed on our YouTube channel. YouTube does that when certain content they deem to be not applicable to children. We had that happen with police brutality video. So apparently the video that we showed yesterday of the protester being pushed to the ground and then hitting his head and bleeding, YouTube made the determination. I would not be shocked if YouTube does the exact same thing, what we're going to be showing you here. And so just understand that. So if y'all start seeing all of a sudden you must sign in to mention you're an adult, well, understand why YouTube does that. Folks, a new report from the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International reveals widespread abuses against civilians in the western part of Ethiopia's embattled Tigray region amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The report claims that security officials and civilian authorities have perpetrated crimes in the neighboring Amhara region. The report found abuse is part of a widespread and systemic attack against civilian population that amounts to crimes against humanity as well as war crimes. However, Sheba Tekesta, a PushStart media, says there's more to the story. She joins us now from the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. Jemal Countess, a freelance photojournalist, was with her on her latest mission. He also joins us from D.C. Glad to have both of you with us. Sheba, I've been following your reports on social media. That's why I first learned about you, and I said, definitely, let's get you on the show. So I certainly appreciate that. And Jemal, you also tweeted me about your work there, and so I said, let's get him on as well. So Sheba, tell us, you give people a sense of what you have seen, what is going on, and how are we even at this point of this conflict happening, and how shameful it is it's not getting necessary attention by Western media.
Well, Roland, first, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to get on your platform to talk about this, because as you said, we don't really almost ever get any attention when we have the truth on our hands. So this conflict in Ethiopia has started November of 2020. The TPLF, which is an armed insurgency group, that was the previous regime and government that was in place for 27 years, has waged a war on the country. And the TPLF is known and has been a terrorist group. They have now caused atrocities, massive destruction, looting, loss of life, and complete travesty in the nation for over a year and a half. However, Western media has typically and in normal form just highlighted things that suits the interests of whatever superpowers want to depict. What you're looking at in these images is from our trip to Ethiopia, where I myself had a personal mission to go and discover for myself the facts on the ground, because we had almost no coverage of the things that were really happening, which are that the TPLF now is attacking Afar, has 5 regions under control for the past 27 years, and plus actually over 30 years. They have caused mass killings and ethnic cleansing in the part that they label as Western Tigray, which is really Welkite and Tigray in Amhara region. We are now finding that there's multiple mass graves in some places, perhaps up to 59,000 or more People have been buried there after being tortured in prison camps or torture camps. Lots of things that the media doesn't want to cover, but yet we had a space today on Twitter with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch spewing complete falsities. While we are on the ground exposing what's really happening, we blatantly get ignored, and massive amounts of people are suffering due to this completely horrible ethnic charged war that's been going on for quite some time.
Jemal, you have been photographing a lot of this. How much time have you spent in Ethiopia? And just give folks a sense of what you have witnessed through your lens.
Well, I started going to Ethiopia in 2013 and eventually started living there towards the latter part of 2014, 15. Met my wife, raised a family, and moved back here to the U.S. in 2019. So I was very familiar with the TPLF regime, which I lived under up until the current prime minister, was placed into power. So all the pictures that you've seen, that you've been showing, have been from my 6 trips to Ethiopia, because I noticed that there was a serious inconsistency with the way it was being reported, because my wife being Ethiopian, she looks at local news, and of course here I'm looking at the big news services and the big news programs, and I saw that there was a serious disconnect. So the TPLF was a longtime friend and ally of the U.S. going back to the Black Hawk Down days, and they basically became the watchdog over the Horn of Africa with the U.S. and the U.K.'s blessing, and actually the European powers' blessings. Resources, training, equipment, all of these kind of things were given to the TPLF to wage this, to basically mount this mission of counterterrorism, what have you. But what happened is they turned those resources and that training and all of those things they got from the West into tools to divide and, subdue all the other ethnicities that lived in Ethiopia. So when they were forced out of power because of protest from Amhara youth and Oromo youth, the country's two largest groups, they retreated back to their region of Mekelle. They did it, begrudgingly, and kind of began to hatch plans to return to power. So what happened is, on the evening of November 3rd, 2020, the TPLF attacked 5 military bases and 100 soft targets as part of a coup attempt to regain power. Secondarily, within that plan was a planned ethnic cleansing of this region, Walkite, which Western sources say is a contested region, but Walkite was actually part of Amhara lands for almost 1,000 years. So I've noticed that certain big stations or big outlets in the West and political entities don't even mention these attacks on the Northern Command bases, these 5 military bases, and they try to control the narrative and play in favor of the TPLF by saying that, Abiy Ahmed launched an offensive into Tigray. But the reality is that on the nights of November 3rd and 4th, at least 6,000 soldiers were killed, most in their sleep, by these surprise attacks, and 60% of the mechanized and artillery hardware was confiscated by the TPLF. And that's how this war basically started, and that has always been kind of missing from the explanation of what exactly is happening in Ethiopia.
Sheba, it is utterly ridiculous when you look at just the flat out ignoring of this stuff by American media. And it has to rise to the level of the atrocities in Rwanda for all of a sudden people to go, oh, look what's happening.
Yeah, that's right, Roland. Jamal just said it. I mean, American media, CNN, and Western media in general actually has completely ignored facts on the ground from the very beginning, starting from, claiming that the Ethiopian government or the Ethiopian armed forces is waging atrocities and crimes against humanity, etc., on the people of Tigray. There's a blockade on Tigray, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen this over and over, where while, for instance, the media was taking a huge PR campaign against the nation, we had in reality on the ground TDF, or the Tigray Defense Forces, attacking Amhara regions, attacking Afar regions for months after a ceasefire that was put in place at the end of June of last year in 2021. While the Ethiopian armed forces has backed off, trying to protect the country for the sake of saving lives, what we had was the TDF making all these attacks, killing so many people, looting, destructing, and we're getting all these reports from the ground. Yet we're getting Tigray genocide and Tigray is under siege, and it was the exact opposite of the reality. And just to give a context, we have over 115 million people in Ethiopia. And of that, I think it's estimated around 6 million are people in Tigray or Tigrayans, of which over 2 million live outside of the Tigray region. And you had a massive amount of people all over the world and in Ethiopia protesting, saying no more, saying fake news, and doing everything possible to make ourselves heard. And yet the press never reflected the facts, and instead continued to be very aggressive towards the Ethiopian government and Ethiopian armed forces. Even went to the extent of America sanctioning Ethiopia, taking away development programs like AGOA that were helping hundreds of thousands of women in the south of Ethiopia, which is nowhere near the conflict in itself. And right now we're facing even more sanctions with HR 6600 and S 3199 that are belligerent and draconian. And you said Rwanda, but what we're looking at is the next Libya or the next Zimbabwe that's in the making if we don't get this stopped.
It is certainly unfortunate. Jemal, final comment from you. When you've reached out to American media, how did they respond? They didn't.
I saw a report on CNN in mid-November of 2020, and I wrote an email, and I figured, we're in the same circles more or less, and we see the same producers, some of the same people. So I figured, okay, somebody would respond. And I wrote to CNN twice, nobody responded. I wrote to The Independent, nobody responded. I've had talks with my colleagues at some of the big wire services, and they've just gone unheeded. So I just decided to take the steps to, cover the story accurately and objectively without bias. Well, it is certainly unfortunate, the lack of media paying any attention. We certainly appreciate both of you giving us this update, letting us know what's going on there. And folks, please be sure to follow both of them on social media so you're getting an unfiltered view of what's happening there in Ethiopia. Sheba, Jamal, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. This right here, Lauren, is, again, a consistent issue. Whether we're talking about Africa, whether we're talking about what's happening in African-American communities in this country, when you have a mainstream media led by white folks, decision makers in position, this is what continuously happens.
Right, sure. They care about what, you see with the Ukraine coverage, we're getting wall-to-wall Ukraine coverage. I often think that the coverage is really contingent on whether or not the people involved in the coverage look like the people who are covering it. And so much of the time in our media, those are white folks that really care only about other white folks. We see that, too, with when people go missing. We see that, in coverage decisions all the time with major American newspapers. It is a huge reason for why there is a big need for the Black press and why the Black press is a hugely important institution in this country, because there's certain stories that would never get covered and never get paid attention to. And along those lines, it's not just race, it's sometimes class. What I've seen with a lot of the bigger news organizations that I've worked for is they hire the same types of people who all go to the same schools, and they come to work with the same sort of thought patterns, and they don't think outside that box. And obviously that impacts the journalism that they put out. I remember being at ABC News, and we seem to always be doing some sort of story on au pairs or getting an extension onto your house. And that was because a lot of the producers had au pairs and were putting on an extension onto their house because they were all making six figures. So you have certain types of stories that just get told over and over again. And of course, they get told at the expense of other stories that should get a lot of attention.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Black power.
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?